Okay, I think we could get started. I know a number of people will probably be sort of coming online as we get started over the next couple of minutes, but we have an exciting and jam-packed agenda for today. Very exciting to get started here. So I'm Daniel Stein, one of the co-founders of Stewards of Change and Chief Insubordination Officer of the National Interoperability Collaborative. So welcome to today's call, and for some of you who were on last week, this is a continuation of Project Unify. We're taking time now to dive a little more deeply into some of the technical aspects of Project Unify, and so today we'll be continuing that from last week. So welcome to everyone there. If you can advance, that'd be great. So Mike Kerr, who is the advance man, who is handling the slides, will be working with us. For folks who are presenting, Mike will advance your slides. Some housekeeping, all of which you guys know already from too much Zoom time already. But the part I wanted to just emphasize was, engagement and asking questions. There's all sorts of ways, of course, with either the raise your hand, which sometimes is a little hard to see as a presenter. In the chat spot itself, we'll try to call that out, or some of the new fun little features that you can have with the clap or hold your hand up just to draw attention as we try to facilitate conversation. And it's often really fun and exciting and adds to the experience when people are engaged in the conversation. Like always, we'll be recording this. Mike, I hope we got the recording on, so it looks like it is. We're also live streaming this over YouTube for those folks who are on the phone, be able to see that. And of course, hopefully everyone signed up for the hub. The URL is there, and that's interesting. Brian Hansberger is upside down a little bit. How are you doing that, Brian? I don't know. It's those special shoes, huh? It's funny to see that. And I encourage everyone to put their cameras on so we can see your shining faces here. If you do sign up for the hub, of course, you'll get notifications about upcoming meetings and stuff like that. And of course, all of the exciting things and publications on the hub you'll be made aware of. So thank you. Advance, please. So today's agenda, as I mentioned earlier, geeking out with Project Unify. So we're going to take a deeper dive on some of the technical pieces, and we've got a number of them. But we're only going to pick off 2 of them today, and I'll talk about that just in a bit. But again, we found that there's more and more interest in going sort of into some of the deeper technical pieces of this, and so hopefully that's what you guys have signed up for and are looking forward to it. So we've got a number of presenters who will be sort of weaving in and out today. On here, and there'll be a number of other people who are part of the POC team who will be commenting and adding their insights, as well as hopefully everyone else on the call as we go forward here. So you can see the list of folks who are at least slated to be talking with us. And so Dr. McCoy from New Jersey Integrated Care for Kids site, Arvinder Singh from Coherence, Mark from Fidiades, who's joined us from the ONC, and we'll be talking a little bit about the topic of today, one of the main topics around patient matching or person matching. Pradeep will also dive deeper into that. Tom Silvius, some work on confidentiality and consent to share, along with Brian Hansberger. So a good crowd of folks today, so you won't have to hear me droning on for the whole time. So please advance one slide. Thank you. Just to briefly, I've been through this a number of times. Folks have been on here. Just want to call out the National Interoperability Collaborative. The bottom line is it's a community of networks, and what we're trying to do is help cross the domains and across the ones that we've identified here. Obviously important that this work, especially in the era of COVID or opioids, the ability to really share across domains and get full picture of an individual or family or client is critically important, and that's really the driving force behind the NIC. And we always appreciate the support and the underwriting from the Kresge Foundation to help us do this work. There's obviously more on the 6 domains some work we did with HIMSS a while ago. So please advance, Mike. I must admit, I've never played hockey, but I love the idea of this. And this is an important part. We'll talk about this a little bit more as we get into today's conversation and ongoing. One of the things we've identified is the fact that we really don't know where the next year is going to really take us. You know, the estimates are left, right, front and back, up and down. But we feel like there's importance to sort of focus on where we end up being in 9-10 months from now. And so the National Action Agenda, which we proposed and are working on, is really designed to weave together this community and other communities so that we actually design collaboratively a roadmap of what are the really actionable steps we can take going forward. And I'll talk a bit more about that. And you can find more on the website about that. But it's the idea that the work that we're doing now is really focused on, as I said, over the rest of this year and then into early next year. And hopefully we'll be able to contribute to meaningful change as we go forward. Next slide, please. So just a couple of words on what's coming up over the next couple of weeks. So next week, we're going to be continuing to talk about the proof of concept. And Eric and others who participated in the MyHIN Interopathon will give us a report from there and what that's looking like, because the POC is actually represented there in the housing domain, and Eric is participating in that. And then we'll also dive more deeply into a couple of the different technical components as we'll talk about later on. What we're going to propose doing next week is extending the meeting, as though an hour and a half is not enough time. We're going to extend it another half an hour, so sort of optional, and to really present some time for discussion. We're going to use the breakout capacity of Zoom and really make sure we allow enough time to dive into some of the deeper topics that folks may want to have some interest in. And we'll alert you to that as we go into next week and at the meeting there. So if you can clear your calendar of interest, that'd be great. The following week, we are kind of expanding beyond the US borders, and we'll be having a conversation around actually the global impact of COVID, particularly on interoperability within the health and human services space, with Alfonso Montero, who leads something called the European Social Network. And that is, I think, about 38 countries from across Europe and Eastern Europe who have this association that's underwritten and supported by the EU. And they've participated in our work in the past. And so I was talking with Alfonso the other day, and I said, boy, that was really kind of interesting to look at what's happening across the borders and across the proverbial pond. And he agreed to join us. So we'll be looking at the impact of COVID and all of the challenges, not all of the challenge, obviously, but some of the top of mind challenges there. And also Dr. Forrest, who's at the University of Calgary and is in Canada, will also be joining the conversation along with others. So that is kind of expanding our vision a little bit. And then I think we'll take a break, I think, and then at the end of June, we'll be focusing a lot of attention on the National Action Agenda, sort of an official, semi-official launch of that with our colleagues from Stanford University School of Medicine and Population Health Sciences, where we'll be actually looking at some of the various components, including the proof of concept, including other elements, including research and other pieces that will be really important for us to talk about as we go through. So that's coming up, and we'll keep you posted on those. So please advance. One more, please. There you go. So I'm just going to spend just a few moments here just for a recap for folks who were either on last week's call or might be new to this week, couldn't make it last week, on sort of some of the key ideas behind the proof of concept, Project Unify, as we call it. Just to sort of level set a little bit, but most of the time we're going to spend talking about a person matching or patient matching, and then confidentiality and the issues associated with that. So in one statement, or actually in two statements here, we've tried to summarize kind of the purpose of this proof of concept. And it's really to create really to demonstrate replicable standards-based information sharing and interoperability across multiple domains. And this is actually grounded in the in some of the work that the Integrated Care for Kids sites are doing, which we heard about a little bit last time. And I think Dr. McCoy is going to be with us today, talk a little bit about that as well. And what we're interested in is achieving the vision by working collaboratively within an open API, open source technology framework. So can we create an architectural framework that others can use in a way that could actually replicate, scale, and accelerate the ideas here? And those are some of the ideas we'll be talking about today. So that's kind of the vision statement behind that. Next. So in terms of the team participants, these are the folks who are, and there's others. So this is not a complete list, but so I apologize for folks who are not on this list who are toiling away on this proof of concept. But some of the folks, I just wanted to show that it's a pretty broad group of folks from a variety of different organizations, consulting companies, open source, different associations, different consultants, different organizations, really trying to represent multiple domains. There are on the NIC Hub, if you've been there, you'll notice under Project Unify, there's about, I think, 175 or 180 people who've actually signed up for the site to be able to track it. And we are continually sort of updating that site, and you'll see all the different participants who have expressed interest. So I'm really delighted by both the individuals and the breadth and the diversity of both organizations, skills that people bring to the table, knowledge around this really complex interoperability work that we're attempting to advance here. So I want to thank everybody for participating in this collaborative effort and starting to make some real progress here. Advance one. Thanks. So up, back one. One back. No, where did you, okay, yeah, right, sorry. So sorry, jumped ahead. So the Project Unify goals and objectives, without spending a lot of time on here, and you guys can scan these, but it's important just to remind us, we're trying to demonstrate the exchange of data and identify governance constructs between domains. So we know there's a lot of work going on over the months. We've looked at a lot of the ONC's work around Gravity and Karen and Da Vinci and Argonaut, and there's a lot of good learning there in the FAST initiative. A lot of work going on there. What we're focusing on and trying to augment is the efforts towards integrating the non-health clinical work as well, the human services, housing, nutrition, food, those kinds of things. Developing specific identity matching patterns as you have people people or patients or clients or customers or however you want to refer to them in different domains. The complexity of identity matching and authorization and authentication becomes incredibly difficult and challenging. And again, that'll be one of the topics we're going to dive into momentarily. But in many ways, that's the crux of, is it the Brian that's showing up in each system? We have some cross-domain mapping and reusability of interfaces to make sure we can accelerate industry adoption through those kinds of making sure that different systems, different standards are able to talk to each other, especially around security protocols, but also around the ability to share information between HL7 and FHIR, that whole standard and other standards within the human services space, the justice space, or the education space, which are obviously different standards. And we're working to try to harmonize, I guess is the best word, or align those so we can really take advantage of those different standards. And I believe I heard yesterday that the Neem Health domain has now been officially launched or will be shortly there. So there is some interesting work, and I just see Catherine Escobar in there, so maybe we'll hear a little bit from Steve there. Steve says, you are sharing your screen with everyone. Okay, I'm not sure that relates to me here. And then, of course, we want to create an open source and open API knowledge base to accelerate the use of these assets. The whole idea is scalability and replicability. How do we make this stuff available broadly so jurisdictions across the country can pick it up? And with the demands that are happening around COVID and the increased demands on the safety net and programs, that's obviously going to be really important. Next slide, please, Mike. There you go. So our Ferris wheel slide, we can spend a lot of time on this, but I think the key point here is we really have the individual and family at the center of what the work is, this whole person-centered approach. And this was a graphic way of really thinking about the various domains that are involved. You can see them across in the blue: judicial, health, behavioral health, etc. It drives more closely into the actual systems, whether or not it's schools or courts or social services programs or hospitals, and then down to the actual care delivery team, the individuals, whether it's probation officer, case manager, worker, surrounding the individual and family. And this is kind of the way we're thinking, well, not kind of the way, this is the way we're orienting our thinking to represent the variety of domains, the types of individuals, organizations that are involved, but to really keep the individual and client at the center of this. And one way we are sort of grounding this is through the our association with Integrated Care for Kids, and in particular, Dr. Christine McCoy, who is representing the New Jersey Inc. site, has been very involved with this and developing the use cases around this. And so if we go to the next slide, I think this is it. Christine, are you on with us?
Yes.
Just a few minutes to talk
I'm
about.
here. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Welcome. Great to see you.
All right. I had to double unmute myself, but I think I'm good. So, yeah. So for those of you not familiar with INC, this was a very recent CMMI cooperative agreement awarded to 8 sites around the country, including the state of New Jersey, for a couple of the Jersey Shore counties to attempt over a 7-year period to really develop a better way of delivering comprehensive services to children who are high need, not just medically, but also socially, in a way that puts them at risk of not just using the healthcare system inappropriately or unnecessarily because they're not getting the primary care that they need, but also for getting placed outside of the home, and very broadly defined, not just being put into foster care, but also potentially being involved in juvenile justice, being hospitalized for psychiatric or substance abuse disorders for significant periods of time, as well as those very medically complex kids whose families are just overwhelmed and really can't support them sufficiently at home without a lot of supports. And so the INC project gives us 2 years to really create a very well thought out approach to identifying these children, sorry about that, and enrolling them into advanced case management is the way that we're handling it here in New Jersey. And we're really required by the project to not just do this within the medical sphere, but importantly, from my perspective, to bridge the medical and public health spheres, which are often not bridged, and we're seeing that a lot right now with, we've seen it with the opioid epidemic and now with the COVID epidemic, and more importantly, with other spheres that are even less likely to be bridging information with the medical system, which you see here. So we've been working on developing our use case, which is on the next slide, and kind of wrapping this story or this concept into the story of the Thompson family that you see here. You see on your slide Sarah Thompson and her children Madison and Jameson. What you don't see is her ex-husband, who is conceived of as being a military veteran with some very serious PTSD problems, who was unable to, he and Sarah were unable to reconcile their marriage. He is, in our scenario, homeless and not providing any support to his 2 young children or to his ex-wife, Sarah. And so the 3 of them are living in an impoverished, part of the Midwest. Post-industrial decline is really their larger surrounding. And unfortunately, Sarah, like many people, got a taste of opioids after an injury and became addicted to them, and got herself involved in the justice system because of driving under the influence. she is in medication-assisted therapy treatment, but not necessarily getting all of the behavioral health care that she needs. And her children have been involved with Child Protective Services. Her older child, Jameson in particular, has been removed from the family multiple times, and his health care has certainly been affected by that. He's got asthma, and Madison probably does too now at age 3. And his medicines don't always get to his new foster homes with him. They don't always know how he's supposed to be using them. And equally importantly, his behavioral health is really challenged. He did a little experimenting with his mother's Suboxone when he was living in her home. That's what led to him being taken out of the home the first time around, and unfortunately has progressed to using other substances to help deal with his psychological issues. And as you can imagine, he's not thriving in the education sector. In part, that may be due to his behavior, but we don't even know. He's not gotten good medical care. We don't know if he has any learning disabilities or other developmental issues that simply haven't been addressed. So we've got Jameson, who's got a pretty good track record right now with multiple school districts, with Child Protective Services, with emergency rooms, and urgent cares, but not with a primary care provider, and clearly with Medicaid managed care, paying these disparate claims that are kind of all over the place. His younger sister, Madison, is kind of heading in the same direction, not getting the early childhood intervention that she needs, and Sarah not getting the support such as, she could have had maternal child health home visiting to help her in Madison up over the last 3 years, but those were not things that were put in place for them. So they really embody, Madison and Jameson, the kinds of children that are going to be identified in the INC project, which really has to recognize that, they don't live in their own little bubble, even though we show them in nice little bubbles on the slide. They are surrounded by this milieu that includes their overwhelmed parents, their overwhelmed schools, a medical system, that when you're looking at emergency rooms and urgent cares is not designed to meet their needs. And so they really need to be wrapped up in a new comprehensive system of care. And that's really what INC is about, but how can it get there unless the information is being carefully shared across these different domains?
And that's what's so exciting about it, is that the conceptual demonstration project is really grounded in stuff that Christine and the teams across INC and other places are clearly involved with in a real way. It's complex, and we're really excited about sort of working together to sort of create that framework that addresses it. So stay tuned for more, as it were. Thanks, Christine. We're going to very quickly shift over to Arvinder. And a couple of slides here, just on the technical and functional considerations. Just to set the stage, remind people what we're thinking about. Again, it's pretty high level, and obviously the details of it we're going to be, sort of working through over the weeks and months ahead. But Arvinder, you want to take it away?
Sure. Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Christine, for setting up the stage. I think it's always helpful as we are trying to really frame up how to go about really identifying what we want to do from a proof of concept perspective. The business context setting allows us to stay grounded to what we are really trying to solve. So as Christine was alluding, in case of the individuals that are involved, we were trying to basically gravitate towards a proof of concept that allows us to show cross-domain data exchange happening using different data representations, going from FHIR to NEEM to SEDS, which is the education standard. So we wanted to make sure in our proof of concept, we are able to demonstrate the information crossing domains and use that as a case to show the capabilities of what's feasible and what's possible. And along with that, and I'm sure the detailed topic that's following is around the person matching that becomes even more critical as to how we approach it, and Pradeep and the team will talk about it, but that's important as we are trying to really create this proof of concept, that how would we really do identity resolution as we cross domains, rest alone staying within the domain, if you will. And I think the idea being, as we're doing this proof of concept, we're also trying to make sure that we're able to bring some of the additional value sets that are from a functionality perspective as we look at housing and stuff of that nature, that sort of becomes sort of our framework to move forward. So I think as you're trying to build a frame of concept, and I think as we did the session last time, there were some very good inputs that we are now trying to incorporate, but the idea is to stay with the overall integrated care for kids scenario, have the same family into consideration, and make it more technical and real by going across these domains and taking on some challenges with different data representations and identity resolution. And I'm sure Pradeep is going to speak a lot about it as we go along. So if you can move to the next slide. This is basically, we showed this last time. This was basically trying to really frame, as a Project Unify, what are the capabilities that we're really going to realize and further elaborate on. And I think we started to list those. I know there was some good feedback from last session, but the governance aspect, as we are trying to go across domains, how would we be sharing data and all the associated constructs that are needed to be applied. Person matching, we talked about it. And of course, the heart of this demonstration, which is the data exchange. But in the other categories in interest of slide, but that will be areas of considering about privacy and security. And I'm sure Tom and other folks will talk about it later in this session as well. So that became our sort of what I'll call it, the catalog of capabilities that the Project Unify intends to elaborate and demonstrate with all these pieces of work, if you will. Of course, we do recognize that we would be dealing with multiple integration standards. We know today there are a few of them which are prominent, the FHIR one being the most prominent, the NEAM being one in place for a long time, SEDS being the education. And we anticipate that as we go in our journey, we'll see some other ones too. So we recognize that as we are trying to build this POC, we have to embrace the heterogeneity of the integration standards. But if you move to the right, which is where the meat of the action is going to be, where we're going to try to put this into a workable, demonstrable code base, we are basically trying to identify the middle layer, and we'll continue to refine it based on the feedback, that these are the core components we think are going to be assets that this project will deliver to the rest of the community for its rapid adoption, reusability, and scalability. And one of the pieces which we're going to be expanding later in the session with Pradeep is how do we really accomplish the person matching thing across domains? How do we really go about and consider all the different challenges that come along with the person matching service, if you will. And similarly, there are other concepts which are around vocabulary data maps and stuff of that nature, which will expand. But that's sort of our overall, as Daniel said, broader vision of how the components are. And we are trying to basically focus on making sure that the outputs become a knowledge base for the community, which is sort of the block that comes back as a feedback loop, and that creates some assets, whether they are APIs, interfaces, vocabulary maps, FHIR extensions, any of those flavors, that is what would allow the industry to accelerate their adoption and embrace this at a more larger scale, if you will. So that's sort of the broader framework. And I know we need to take a deeper dive into our focus topic today, continuing from our last session, which is going to be more around the person matching space, if you will. So that's pretty much what I wanted to convey to the group. I'm sure if Dave or anybody else wants to add on or contribute, or Andrew for that matter, please feel free, because we have had a lot of conversations on each one of these blocks, and each one of them had an hour conversation itself. But anybody else wants to comment, critique, more than welcome. But other than that, I will then pass it over, I believe, to back to Daniel to transition over to the person matching space, if you will.
Thanks, Arvinder. I think one of the topics we can focus on next week, and hopefully we'll have a little conversation later, is actually for people who want to do a deeper dive into this particular chart and the subsets of it. So we'll set the conversation up so that we can dive into that, because as you said, any one of these can take, as we have already found, more than the time allocated for most work days here. So let's move to the next section. And then we've got some time built into the conversation around the person matching here. As I mentioned, here's at least some of the particular areas we feel are going to be important to sort of dedicate some chunk of time to going into more detail. And today we're going to talk about person matching and hopefully get to security and privacy as well, and privacy and confidentiality reality. But the other ones that are going to come up will be the platforms. So as we've talked about in the past, the Interoperability Lab from MyHand, HS Link, fire server synthetic data, that whole, how does this stuff actually work and move between and amongst the different technologies, standards harmonization, and that will be its own conversation. Of course, we've had multiple conversations of folks who want to look back in the archives. You can see some very interesting and active conversations around that. And now, as I said, with the development of both the NEEM Health and also SEDS for education will be interesting. And then UX, UI, and then obviously governance is a huge conversation that we'll be also diving into, and ethical uses of data and information, which comes up in every part of the conversation. So please advance one. And so we're going to move now into the topic here is person matching, the part of the proof of concept. And I want to introduce and thank Mark Profidiades from ONC, who is going to share a little bit about what's coming up next week with the ONC and the exciting work on the same topic, and say a few words. And I want to thank Mark for his and the rest of the folks from ONC who are some on the call today, who've been just great partners and helped us really understand more. As I joked in yesterday, this group may be one of the few in the country that can say Da Vinci, Siren, Gravity, Argonaut, and Fast in one breath. And we're not in the health space. So we're really trying to practice what we preach here. So with that, Mark, take it away. And I think we probably want to advance this slide.
Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it. And again, we're so happy to be involved with the NIC and all the work you've been doing. And to set up what I'm about to say, I'm going to highlight a few things that you all are already so aware of. But again, just to set up our Monday session, I just want to reiterate that, to see a complete story of a person's longitudinal health picture, we have to have all the pieces of a person's interactions with the healthcare system, but not only the healthcare system, also with community providers, behavioral health, social determinants, and all the other cross-domain communication that we here at the NIC have been working so hard on for so long. And in doing so, to bring all that information together from so many different sources, we need to ensure that we're properly identifying that person so that we can collect all their information, and that we're collecting only the information that belongs to that person and not some other person with a similar name, for example. So speaking for a moment about a purely medical environment, if a person's a member of, say, a vertically integrated healthcare provider, such as a Kaiser Permanente, where everything's under one roof, the primary care provider, the specialists, the labs, the pharmacy, the hospital, everything's under one roof. They all use the same medical record system. When a person comes in to see any of them, they log on to the same system and they see everything in their medical record. Because it's all consolidated in that one EHR. But, most people are not in such a system. They have a provider here and a specialist here. They go to the labs over here. They go to different pharmacies. And not to mention all the things that we discuss, we want to bring in all the other information that's part of that longitudinal health record and story about that person. So we're talking about, unconnected sources and domains, and we need to bring all that in together. And to do that, the first challenge is to consolidating that person's information is to make sure we have that person so that we know all that information actually belongs to them. So we're talking about patient matching or person matching. And, we at ONC are acutely aware of the challenge and the need to solve this, not only at ONC, but in so many other agencies within the federal government. So on Monday, we are having a day-long, it's called the ONC Working Session, Patient Identity and Matching. And it's on Monday, the 1st of June from 9:30 to 4:30. And we're bringing in not just experts, but people that are actually working with this, people like yourselves, people on the ground that are having these challenges. And we're going to be hearing from them, all day on Monday. The morning session from say, 9:30 to 12:30, approximately, actually 12:40. We're going to be discussing the challenges around patient identification in matching, and it's again from the boots on the ground. After we take a break, and again, we're hearing from so many different experts and people in the field. In the afternoon, we're going to hear about exploring the potential solutions and what we can do to solve this problem. And there are many. We discussed them here. Pradeep's going to be talking, I'm sure, about some a little later on. But again, when we're done with this listening session, we're going to put this together as part of the ONC's report to Congress, so that Congress will actually have the information that they need to have, so that they can actually understand the challenges we're having. So that's what we're doing. You all are invited. It's free of charge, but you do have to register in advance. So we really encourage you to do that. And I think Daniel is putting a link somewhere so that you all can click on it and register and be a part of that.
Thanks. Mike, could you show the next slide? I think this is the overview. That's the working session. Sorry, and then the next slide, one more, Mike. There you go. So we'll be posting this quickly after today. But actually, you know what we can do? We can actually grab the link. And Sundays, if you can grab the link from there and put it in the chat, then people can get it. That'll be great. It's a full day session. I think Mark, you said there's a whole bunch of people presenting. So sounds like a
Yes.
great
There are
thing.
people from health information exchanges. There are people from government, from the private sector, from healthcare organizations. So it's just a wide range of folks that are having patient matching challenges throughout the system. And hopefully we'll get a full range of what the challenges are. And then in the afternoon, hopefully what some of the solutions are.
That's great. I know a number of people from were on this call and part of the POC who are planning on attending. So we'll hopefully be able to sort of next Friday even kind of bring that back and kind of do a little bit of sort of mix and match what was kind of covered and how we can learn, because we don't want to recreate the wheel by any means. So especially if you guys can be on, let's make sure we kind of coordinate and leverage as much as possible. So timing is good. And appreciate the invite for folks, and I appreciate your participating here.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks much. If you can advance slide one more time, we're going to dive in. Pradeep, there it is. So Pradeep, are you with us? Can you take it away? Is not Pradeep on. You have to double unmute if you are not here. It's curious. I thought I saw him on here before. Rita, are you? Rita, I know you're on here. I don't know if you know where you went.
I am on.
Okay. I think we can. I don't know where Pradeep. He was on momentarily. I don't know if he got kicked off or what here. Curious. Can I put you on the spot? You want to go through this and we can help with that if he's not here?
Sure.
I will try to reach him as we're going on. I'm not sure what's happening. But
Sure.
we'll as well.
But as Arvinder mentioned earlier, you're definitely welcome to chime in, since there have been several of us on these calls and going through this particular topic. As was mentioned earlier with the use case that was presented, we're looking at several different domains, and there's different types of records that are associated with those different types of domains. And oftentimes those records are represented differently, even within particular domains such as healthcare, where we are seeing the medical, substance abuse, and rehab services represented, and of course there are others as well. So this is just a small snapshot of the different types of records that can exist. And the other ones that are also represented in the use case described is child, youth and family services, justice, education, and we kind of lumped several in under social determinants of health, even though they might be called different things, such as social services, but they include things that can be captured, such as food insecurity, housing, transportation, and I know we have at least one person or so, or a few from the Gravity Project that can speak much more to those particular elements. But I think we can go on to the next slide unless anyone else wants to comment on the domains and types of records that are listed or should be added.
You know, I think, Rita, one of the things that's amazing is when you start to line it up, and I know you'll talk about this a little bit on the next slide, is just the diversity of kinds of sources of information that are reflected in the, the Thompson case here. And when you start, laying them out this way starkly is certainly a kind of a wake-up call in terms of the complexity of the task here. So.
Very true, and that actually brings up another point in terms of some of the things to consider when you're trying to like figure out person matching or where we're getting our information from in terms of the source of that data. So yes, I agree.
Okay, there we go. I think Pradeep is in.
Is he?
Pradeep?
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, happy Friday, everyone. And I was on another call, just hopped off that call. Thank you. I think it's perfect timing, just in time.
They call that just-in-time timing.
Just in time, yes. Yeah, thank you. As Daniel and Rita were saying, the slides that you have seen on the Thompson family case, that highlights the important dynamic of how the data of an individual is captured across different domains. For example, here we are seeing that the information related to the Thompson family was spread within 5 domains. This is just a use case. And beyond the use case, the information may be present in different domains as well. And as we see here, the information is there within the healthcare domain, as well as child, youth, and family services, Department of Justice, Department of Education, and things related to the social determinants of health, the SDOH. And even within healthcare, as we see here, we are seeing that the information is spread within 3 different domains, like subdomains. One is related to the medical records, the other is related to substance abuse and rehab. So this brings up the complex dynamic of working with data across different domains. And could we go to the next slide, please? So just to set the context, and this is an important topic, and there are 124 people on the call. So this highlights the importance. I mean, even though this seems like a simplistic approach of bringing data from 2 different or aligning data coming from 2 different domains, it is important to just go over some of the basics so that we can dissect the different complexities that are there within the cross-domain matching issue. So to set the context, the record linkage, it is a process of combining the data on 2 or more records that refer to the same individual. And this is a collective process. Even though it looks like bringing data together, it is a collective process of 4 steps at least. That's what the team has brainstormed and drafted, which is identification. Starting with identification, this is confirming a person's identity from 2 or more domains or organizations. This is trying to see the possibility of an individual existing in the other domain. Then the key is, the next step is matching. Here we are trying to associate the records that identify an individual across different domains. So once we match the individual, that's when we are moving to the next step of linking the data, where we are trying to combine the data from different sources. By combining, we're trying to validate some information, as well as integrate it, as well as enhance. So there are multiple things that we are trying to accomplish while linking the data. And finally, resolving. So there may be some conflicts of information that are present, and these may be conflicts related to the information that is captured or the data standards related to the information. So overall, record linkage is a collective process with multiple steps within it. And we'd like to share an example by looking at an individual across two different domains. If we could go to the next slide, please. Yeah, for our example, let's look at two domains. Domain one, let's say, is healthcare, and domain two is education. And we are talking about an individual by name Daniel Clark. So on the healthcare domain, the information is captured as patient name, date of birth, race, and maybe let's assume that only the last 4 digits of social are captured on the healthcare domain. And because it's healthcare domain, medical condition information will be present within it. And now when we look at education, the same individual, Daniel Clark, was documented as Dan Clark. And date of birth, the month and date seem to be similar, but there is some kind of a conflict that exists in the year of birth, as well as the standard with which the information is captured. The separators that are present on healthcare are different than those present on the education side. And for some reason, there is some conflict with the race information. And social security number was captured as the traditional 9 digits. And attendance information is present on the education side. So as we can see here, it's while we are trying to link the data or bring the data together, we're also trying to see different standardizations with which the information is captured, as well as the issues related to some
Pradeep, I think we lost you. Your connection just disappeared.
as well as the.
There you go. Pradeep, we didn't hear the last 30 seconds of what you just said.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So as we are trying to bring the data together from the two different domains, something that we are highlighting here is the issues with the way the information is captured, the fields that are used to represent the same information across domains, as well as enhancing the information in the sense now a research community which is looking at both healthcare and education data will have an understanding of why the student has only 30% attendance. What exactly is the reason that is leading to a 30% attendance? And at the same time, someone will know that 30% attendance might be due to a healthcare event or a healthcare condition. So this is an example that illustrates the complexities that come with the record linkage problem. If we could go to the next slide, please. So another important piece that comes into play when we talk about record linkage is what kind of data are we trying to use to accomplish this patient matching or record linkage or bringing the data together. So is it something related to, are we going to accomplish the record linkage based on identifiable data, which is unencoded data? Or is it going to be based on encrypted data, which is encoded, the information being garbled to protect the privacy of the data? So this plays a very important role as people who are interested in record linkage. This puts the importance on the governance aspect of record linkage. What exactly are the kind of agreements that we would need to put in place so that the domains or organizations are comfortable in sharing the data with a trusted third party or an honest broker to accomplish this linkage? So it can be a software tool which will be helpful to make that happen. So if we could go to the next slide. So just building upon it, as we are talking about how are we going to accomplish this, because there are two domains with information on the same individual, and we should be able to bring the information together. So there are some operational aspects when it comes to it. It's not just simply a transfer of file. There are many things that go in this complex environment. And to start with, it is important to identify what are the domains that are going to be, because the domain adds a different dynamic to it as information is captured using different standards. It can be domains, study participants, or different organizations. So who are they going to be and what exactly is their role going to be? Because that will decide the kind of information systems that are currently existing and the kind of data transfers that we need to think about, along with the governance and agreement aspect of it. The next piece is the patient matching engine. This is the engine or the trusted middle party which would be able to receive the data from both the domains or both the organizations in order to accomplish the collective process that was highlighted a few minutes ago. So which is the 4 steps: identification, matching, linking, and resolution. So the trusted third party, it can be a software app, it can be an organization, but who actually accomplishes that? That's another key aspect of the operational roles. The next one is the data storage and message generator aspect. So once this record linkage has been accomplished, what exactly is the end goal? Is the end goal to accomplish the task? And then once the task is accomplished, is it the data will be discarded? Or once the linkage has been accomplished, are we going to generate a unique ID for each of those individuals that had a match across the domains? And how is that information going to be saved? Or where exactly will that information be saved? And if it is going to be saved, how is it going to be retrieved? And what kind of messages will be generated to the domains or the study participants? So this is the operational roles aspect of it. And I just wanted to, in order to stimulate some discussion, I would like to open it to the audience who have joined for this call. Have you seen any other operational roles in this dynamic aspect when it comes to record linkage, other than these 3 that we have highlighted here?
I would only add that the linkages and relationships between the entities is also going to be an important component moving forward.
Sure, thank you so much. And if you could please announce your name, that would be great. So
so Ben Hogan at Sinzing. So we're participating and helping with the patient matching. But yeah, the relationships between the entities as you start trying to understand.
Sure, thank you.
Households is
that's
important.
A great point. Yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts? Any other operational roles that you have come across during, while working on any record linkage aspects?
I think you've stumped the crowd. I think we can probably move forward. If you could speak a little louder, I think that would be great. I think a couple of people are having a little.
Sure, absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, if we could go to the next slide. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Here we go. Pradeep, are you still with us?
Yes, yes, I'm here. Yeah.
Yep. Slide.
Sure. So the next aspect is building upon those operational roles, trying to understand what kind of activities fall within each of those operational roles. For example, with the domain 1, which we are talking about, the domains or study participants, the things that we need to deal with are the governance, as highlighted earlier, and getting a good set of idea related to what kind of agreements are needed, what kind of data sharing agreements are needed. And the next one is when it comes to the domains, it's talking about the pre-processing of the organizational data before it can be shared to accomplish the linkage or initiate the linkage task. The key is, since we are dealing with cross domains, it is important to understand the universe of data elements that can be helpful in identifying the individual. And from that universe of elements, then the next step is looking at the minimal list of elements which would be absolutely needed in order to accomplish the linkage, following which we would need to look at what are the data standards with which the information is captured across the different domains. And then, as highlighted earlier, about what kind of data format is someone comfortable in sharing to initiate the linkage. Is it going to be and the kind of transmission plays an important role, and that itself stimulates additional discussion as to how that would be accomplished. So once that is done, the patient matching engine is a trusted third party. This can be an organization or a platform which would receive the data, conduct the necessary quality checks before performing the activity of record linkage. And linked, it's trying to come up with a common agreement of how do you resolve those conflicts. So once the activities within the patient engine are done, then the next step is moving on to the data storage and message center. So how is this integrated data saved, and what kind of messages are generated for an external researcher, or it can be for the organizations that are sharing the data. So based on the activities that are outlined here, I just wanted to open it up to see if there is something that is missed here, or have you come across a different activity which falls within these three major buckets of domains, patient matching, and data storage? Any thoughts?
You know, Pradeep, there's a question here from Matt around, is there an exploration of decentralized identifiers or using zero knowledge proofs to be able to validate or prove an individual's identity without sharing personal identifiable information? So I think it's a deeper question, which we might get into once you finish up the next slide. We're going to open it up for broader questions, but this one quick question around decentralized identifiers, is that something you can address, or others?
So this has been Hogan again. So there is technology whereby you utilize hashed data and centralized repositories so that information is not shared in clear text, but it is still matched and results are provided in a very, very secure method. So that, you know, a great example of this is there's a project called ericstates.org that does voter registration modernization, and all of the states pass a bunch of information to a centralized repository and matching occurs, but all of the very sensitive PII is not stored in that centralized repository as clear text. So that is you know, one way that's handled, and I know there's multiple solutions doing that, but the sharing of data becomes very tricky across domains, and so it's going to be very important to make sure that data is not transferred in clear text and cannot be decrypted. So that would be my answer there.
And I think this is Ravinder. I think, Matt, I think that's part of what we want to engage the group and community as to what are the options. And you'll see it in a couple of slides down, that we are absolutely mindful of recognizing what would be the most effective way of exchanging it in terms of whether avoiding, because there was a lot of passionate conversation yesterday with Greg talking about how to be sensitive to all the privacy of information. So that is definitely in play in terms of looking at other options. Even we contemplated about talking about using provenance and using some sort of a blockchain construct. So all of that is not something that we are sort of dismissing. I think this initial thread that Pradeep walked us through was primarily to ground everybody that these are the typical challenges. So people who are familiar with master data management would say, yep, we know this before, but a lot of people may not appreciate the complexity that may go along with operationalizing these kind of things. But yes, to your point, and I think you'll see that those are the various threads of potential solutions / tracks that we can explore in trying to really see what works best for a cross-domain exchange of data. And all, in my mind, all of those are on the table. Each one of them brings its own set of challenges and constraints. And my belief is, not everybody agrees, that it might not be a one size fit all across every domain, but that's just my school of thought. There are other people who think that creates another set of challenges, if you will. But anyway, long story short, I think, and we would love for you guys, and whoever has ideas, to contribute and join the group, because that definitely enhances our thought process when we have other smarter people contributing things for us to contemplate and see what's the best way to take the next step in this direction.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Arvinder. That's great. And I just wanted to add about the decentralization aspect. It's, as Ben was saying, it's the encryption of the data, the identifiers. It can be, data can be hashed, and then the data can be shared to accomplish the linkage. So it also brings up the aspect related to the privacy preserving record, which is also another source of accomplishing the linkage. And you can find some good information on the privacy preserving record linkage and Australian National University, Dr. Peter Kristen. He has a very good book on data matching if someone is interested to follow up on this conversation regarding privacy preserving record linkage.
Sounds great.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Put that, maybe we can put that in the link there. There's a couple other questions. You know what? Let me suggest that we move to, you have another sort of flow diagram, but let's move to the second question, the second slide, which actually gets into some of the discussion topics I think that are really relevant at this moment in time. We'll obviously have to go into more detail on the patient person matching, and that'll occur in the subgroup as this continues to develop. So Mike, if you would advance 2 slides. And then we can, this is the sample schematic. Yeah, here's the kind of the path forward. As we were preparing for this today, we wanted to put some ideas out there. Obviously, you don't have time to discuss all of these, but there are some main questions. I think, Arvinder, you mentioned a couple of them. Obviously, Pradeep, you brought some forward, as well as Ben here. So let's dive into this for a few moments before we sort of move into the overview of the privacy conversation.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Daniel. I'll take a lead and then have other people, whoever feels comfortable contributing. I think, Matt, you will see, as you pointed out, we have the thread, one of the threads we want to explore is the use of non-federated, which is sort of a decentralized space from a peer-to-peer resolution framework. So that's part of what we think we need to explore. But our main sort of path forward, our goal is to basically see what mechanism and what approach really works across specific domains, given that every domain may have a different way of approaching, identifying the individual, and so on and so forth. So our one of the beliefs is that we may end up with different sort of patterns / approaches depending on what domains we are crossing, if you will. And so that's something that we are absolutely sort of discussing, and anybody who wants to contribute should do it. One of the other thought process was our fundamental thinking is that as we exchange more data, our ability to really resolve the individual and the accuracy of that resolution needs to start improving as opposed to staying static. And we, as we were discussing, that as more and more data starts to flow, the confidence and the trust in that matching process needs to improve. And we contemplated, or we've been discussing options around using a GUID kind of a construct, which gets sort of augmented to that record and continues to then propagate, and so on and so forth. There was another construct of using the provenance of the record creation as a mechanism to identify and not stick to GUIDs, if you will. So we've been constantly trying to basically sort of look at the different options and mechanisms that are there, and we continue to discuss and have a discourse on what would create the best value from, more importantly, being very sensitive to not creating too many false positives as well as false negatives. So that construct is always there in our back of our minds. But I think that's sort of where our conversations are going in. If Andrew's on the call, I think we talked about initially going back to the original diagram. There's a lot of governance aspect, and I think even Pradeep emphasized on it. And we are trying to basically look forward to creating those templates that will facilitate this cross data sharing and have being mindful of the consent part of it. And then of course, and I'm sure if Greg is on the call, he will absolutely, he's very passionate about it. And I learned a lot from him, is we have to be very sensitive, and he gave us, and at least opened my eyes, that we need to be very mindful of that if we are going across and trying to match, and if there are failures, that could impact and harm a lot of people. And if we do not design for, in our governance, in our framework, the ability to handle failures and notifications and stuff of that nature, we might be creating some negative aspects of this interoperability thing. So we are trying to put all of those considerations, sort of recognizing them and acknowledging them as we try to find our sort of the solution to it, if you will. Anyway, I've tried to hit all the bullet points, but I'm sure Greg or Andrew or anybody wants to contribute or add on to it, please feel free to bring your thoughts onto this.
This is Greg. Thanks for the shout out. I appreciate it. I mean, I feel, I have felt often like a little bit of a wet blanket and a broken record on these calls. And I also I really don't, think that this should be like one person's role to sort of bring up these concerns. One way to frame this that I observed, in conversations with health and human service providers, talking about the need for interoperability to enable warm referrals and closed loops. One thing I observed was that, the Hippocratic Oath, which is kind of a first principle for healthcare, didn't seem present in the room in conversations between healthcare and human services about how to enable interoperability, which is do no harm. And I just wonder how these conversations would change if the first principle of the conversation was do no harm. If it wasn't like, oh yeah, we should make these systems secure, we should make them private, blah, blah, blah. Like that doesn't really cover the whole question of like, how do we ensure that these things do no harm? So I really appreciate you bringing up that challenge and bringing it to the center of the conversation. I'm by no means an expert, although I'd be glad to recommend other people who might be able to come and start unpacking these challenging issues, which are really just not nearly addressed by questions of security and individual consent.
No, I think, Greg, and as I said, I was in our previous conversation, this was very helpful. And I think we need to, at the same time, wearing a solution hat, our job is to create the right balance. And I know the balance always looks negative from the other perspective. And I think one of the thought processes is basically what I took away from our conversations was to basically, as people talk about privacy by design, so don't make these constructs more like a bandage or an afterthought, but make them more central to our design and our solutioning exercise. And I think that aspect, at least from my vantage point, became sort of very much central to how I go about looking at the problem now, to say, okay, I need to bring that as an equally important aspect of a solution as opposed to being the only solution aspect of the problem or being an afterthought. So I think I'm taking that from a sort of a next path forward, and that's why I think this needed to be out here, is to make sure, and I think I'll bring it to Mark's attention from the ONC side, that as we are doing the person matching concepts and we are discussing this thread and trying to really solve all the bits and bytes issue. The privacy by design aspect needs to be more central and more germane to the actual solutioning and the different solutions we come up with. And I think some of it may bleed into the governance part, some of it may bleed into the technology part, and some of it may bleed into operational part, because it's a flavor of trying to do things right from a solution perspective, but at the same time, right by doing the operations from a notification, all that stuff. So I do feel you pivoting and bringing this into the play really makes sure that whatever solution we come up with, it is mindful and it is sort of anchored around respecting the privacy and to your point, do no harm kind of a construct, if you will. So that's the way I'm looking at it. And again, I'm thankful for your passion, because I love people who are passionate about it, because that really speaks very close to me, at least. Anyway, I think we spent too much time on that part. Andrew, do you want to talk about anything on the governance templates? Because I think we felt that to be also an important part and a consideration for solving the person matching thing. And I'm saying that to Mark also, since there's a big ONC thing, we were trying to basically not only just limit to the technology part, but also try to focus on things we think people would say, oh, what do we do about this? And technology pretty much becomes secondary in those kind of situations. But anyway, enough of my ranting. I wanted to see if people have other comments on it. But long story short, this is what, as much as we talked about it, we think these are threads that we need to address and move, resolve, or I shouldn't say resolve, but have a discussion and discourse to get to a better place, is how we see the next steps in this space.
This is Andrew. I unfortunately dropped in an inopportune moment a couple minutes ago, so I didn't hear everything that Greg, you got to say, but appreciated the do no harm direction. Real quickly on governance, I think that it's fundamental here that we don't have all the answers around how this can actually play out. There's lots of open questions, but presenting this or considering this from a functional perspective, understanding what the nature of those questions are, and how to name policies that answer them. For instance, what are the person match criteria for a particular context? What are the semantics between different domains when there is a match? Those types of things need to have a governance perspective. And as much as anything, and there's lots of things to be excited about on Project Unify that I'm personally excited about, is to build some scaffolding around what governance needs to look like for this type of cross-domain interoperability, and in the proof of concept and other opportunities, start to practice that, start to play that out and understand how those things work. So I think governance is one of the most exciting aspects of all of this.
Thanks, Andrew. And there's an interesting conversation going on in the chat around regulatory requirements. As we can obviously see, this is a really important topic with all sorts of kinds of challenges, technical challenges, semantic challenges, and of course governance challenges. We, as both folks have said, we don't claim to have an answer, but we want to make sure we're asking the right questions, so that specifically for right in front of us in terms of the ink sites or the work that's going on the ground, these are going to be real questions, right? These are not going to be theoretical questions, but how these governance kinds of questions and fairness and bias questions are addressed are things that are going to have to bring up. And it's exciting to be able to do that. We would encourage folks who want to participate in this, as already been said, come join the conversation. We really envision having these work groups that are really focused on this in ways that can then be brought back to the group with ideas and frameworks, so that what we're offering to do is really sort of consolidated thinking around this. So any last thoughts on this before we're going to just do a quick overview of the privacy one, and we're going to probably get into the details of that next week, given we ran a little bit long here. But I just want to open the floor if anyone else wants to respond to that. Or Christine, I don't know if any of this is resonating with you, the challenges you're facing within New Jersey right now, thinking about these things.
Yeah, and I was actually just thinking about this conversation about the data sharing and regulations, et cetera. I mean, in New Jersey, we have the challenge of just not having much of a culture of data sharing. I think that's what the Bright Hive folks called it a few weeks ago, which I thought was a very useful term. And one of the challenges we face is that in healthcare, everybody sort of refers back to HIPAA. Being largely a public health practitioner and only a little bit a medical practitioner, the vast majority of the work that I and my direct colleagues do is actually not governed by HIPAA. And so that's where we get into this whole realm of what is the appropriate safeguards for this data, because there's not a lot of clear regulation. So we have this sort of public health data that there's a lot of vagueness about it, except in the case of like HIV, for example. And then the issues around with FERPA, because a lot of our focus is on children and schools, and the fact that FERPA structure does not allow a permission is a one-time permission, essentially, I think is the issue there. So we're really, and I know that Susan.
You're starting to steal my thunder, Dr. McCoy.
Oh, sorry. I was just wondering if Susan.
We have a whole presentation ahead on this.
Call wants to talk a little bit about their approach in Austin, Texas, which I found very inspirational.
I think, Daniel, I think there was one good comment made by Cynthia. She's from Michigan.
Yeah.
I think Michigan Data Warehouse does try to create a master person index / patient client index and tries to go across the different domains, if you will, which are beyond the regular healthcare domain. So again, it's doable in certain places, but I think, and I think we need to learn from each one of those experiences and see how best to incorporate these sort of various ways of people have addressed this in the past. But I think back to Greg's point and everybody else that's sort of passionately chatting on the side is to basically have all those perspectives have a proper discourse on that is how I look at it to be in the better place collectively. But anyway, I think we'll spend more time, so we don't want to take away the privacy slide deck away.
Yeah, let's move to that. But let's say, one of the topics we can look at also discussing next week in greater detail, kind of diving into this. There's some great comments. Hope Cynthia and Mary Sarah and others who are deeply involved in this topic will bring some insights to that. So, and of course, on the hub, you can add your comments and thoughts as well, and hopefully we can respond to those. But let's move forward. And as I said, took a little longer than anticipated. But Tom and Brian, can you please set up for us kind of what sort of the preview, the prequel to what next week will look like when we start to talk about privacy and some of the exciting stuff that's going on there.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, so as we've heard, the issues around privacy and security are many. In the health arena, we've had about 15 years or so to work on that. We understand those issues pretty well. Not all of them are solved, obviously, and many of them have been brought up on the call already. But the goals of Project Unify are when you start crossing domains between health and human services, and you think about all the agencies that are involved in that and the courts and everybody else, the issues get significantly more complex. And so we're going to present next week some concepts and some of the toolkits that we have available to us in Project Unify and lay out, as we did with the identity matching, some of the issues that the project will will attempt to address issues like provenance of the data, trust issues, ownership, the variety of policies, that vary state by state, et cetera.
Tom, you've jumped to the end. Daniel, did you want me to do an intro of the first few slides?
Yeah, why don't we just kind of preview it quickly to give a sense of it, because
could we jump 2 slides ahead? So as we've seen in the previous discussions today, we're talking about exchanging information across multiple different domains, multiple different agencies or organizations, often with different information exchange protocols. And it's critical when we do this to somehow maintain some sense of the notion of privacy of that information as it moves between those domains. There is a standing principle of patient ownership of their wellness data or client ownership of their wellness data. And that includes protected identifying information that might have been used for doing patient-client matching, as well as the gory details of medical records or someone's child welfare records, school transcripts, etc. Of course, there's also this balance of obligations. You can't very well assert ownership and complete privacy of your medical records, and then as a consequence, not be able to get medical services or be able to get social services to support your well-being. And there are also laws that say that we are allowed to share certain information in support of public health and or justice purposes, anonymized information for research, etc. The challenge here is that we have to ensure that access to this sometimes very, very personal information is protected with some degree of control by the patient or client, and to some degree of granularity based on their circumstances. You may be perfectly happy saying in your doctor's office, signing the consent form that says, sure, doc, you can share my medical records with any other specialist you need to share them with medical specialists. And be perfectly happy having entire documents get shared. But you may then turn around if you're the victim of domestic abuse and say, but my address cannot be shared with this particular individual who is my abuser. And that's where we get into the potential of not conflicting, but complementary requirements for how we address asserting privacy on the part of information, especially when it's going between agencies and domains. Previous slide. Child foster care is an extreme use of this. Federal and state statutes require that child youth and family services agencies are required to collect and store all information associated with a child in state care, such as someone in foster care or in the juvenile justice system. And it has to be stored separate from the source systems until the child turns 18 or 21. By the way, depending on whether or not as a foster child, they happen to be getting federal funding for a post-secondary education. Not that most folks really care about that, but it explains the 18 or 21. And that includes, there's school transcripts, medical records, court records, foster care records, juvenile justice and court records, etc. Next slide. And the challenge there is not just a slide after that, forgive me, we're a little out of order here for my standard pattern on these. And the challenge there is not just that the standards are different for moving things from one place to another, but the privacy regulations are different for each of these different types of records. Now, there are a lot of commonalities between these regulations, but there are also some subtle differences that need to be supported in whatever mechanisms we put in place for multi-domain privacy assertions. Next slide.
Brian, let me jump in here just for a second. I think that there's a lot of detail here.
And by the way, I was just about done with the next one, and I assumed that we will go into these in gory detail next week.
Right.
I'm just trying to give people a flavor.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think this is obviously a very meaty topic of conversation. So let me interrupt here for a second, Brian, and say that we're gonna take time to go into this more. And I know there's a lot of people on the call who have a lot of passion around this. So we'll dedicate a chunk of the upfront section of the meeting, and then we'll break into groups. Let me just say that I know there's a lot of commentary in the chat going on here. We are able to continue, extend this conversation another 10 minutes or so if people want to sort of respond to what's been out there. Obviously, people have to jump off, by all means, do that. But if folks want to hang around for a little bit, I know there's a couple of topics here that I want to open the door on, and then we'll capture them and come back at next week's session for greater detail on that. So
great. The message on this slide is that privacy assertions are just a very, very small part of an overall security and privacy solution set that extends through these topics and beyond. And this is worthy of many sessions just to cover all of the gory details of each of these different topics. Next slide. And I think this is my final slide for today. And that is that privacy assertions and dynamic consent are two different complementary, not competing approaches to providing some privacy information. The static privacy marking is great if you need fine-grained control or if you need to be able to analyze privacy assertions offline, but they're pretty much guaranteed the minute you exchange that data that those static assertions are out of date. And these are covered, for instance, by the HL7 data segmentation for privacy standard and the fire security label standards. Dynamic consent, where you have to ask each time you go to do something with a piece of information, mother may I, as represented by the consent to share, is great because it provides real-time consent. It ensures you really have support for 42 CFR Part 2. But you need to also maintain, along with that record, some provenance, some notion of who was the custodian or the steward of this particular piece of information, so that you know what server to go back to and ask for consent. The example I'd like to throw out for this is if you are one of those child welfare agencies that's required to collect, for instance, all of the medical records for a child in foster care and stick it away in a data warehouse, independent of its originating electronic health record systems. 5 years later, somebody in child welfare, let's say the original case manager wants to go and look at that medical record. Well, along the way, while they may have been allowed to see that medical record when it was originally exchanged and stored away, along the way, that case manager may have fallen out of favor with the original patient or their guardian, and they may no longer be granted consent to actually look at that record. If all you're doing is relying on static privacy marking in the original medical record, you don't know that this case manager hypothetically had become a stalker for that particular child that was in foster care.
Thanks,
so it's an important, and this is an important balancing act that needs to be maintained between static privacy marking and dynamic consent. And we will get into the gory details, including a number of other issues. If you want to skip ahead 3 slides. And I'm going to be done. I'm done, Daniel.
Okay, great. So yeah, obviously there's a lot of passion, a lot of material here to go into, and we'll dedicate the more appropriate amount of time next week to do it. So I apologize for cutting you short there, Brian.
Not a problem.
I don't know if Susan is still on. If you are, Susan, you brought up a couple of good points. I want to just open the floor for a minute. For folks who are still on, I'm assuming you can hang around for a few more minutes. I just want to give you a second to speak if you're still on. I don't know if you left yet.
Hi, this is Susan, and I am still here.
Oh.
I need to, I think, ground any of my comments with an understanding that I work for a very small community-based nonprofit organization. And I have been involved in a number of innovative operations in the Austin, Texas area. I know that what Christine was referring to was our work with the Story app, which is an application where we were joining, in particular, medical data for children with significant medical complexity with education data, and working with both FERPA and HIPAA. Our experience in developing and implementing that, which it is now implemented within the comprehensive care clinic, has been that the families of those students, those children, bent over backwards because they found that the technology actually helped them in the care of their children. It allowed communication across a whole host of medical providers, as well as education. We did not yet build in links to the Child Protective System. That, had we been able to pursue an INC grant, that would have been next in line, but we didn't get there. I guess another comment that I made was around the use of 211 data, because that is structured data. And it is structured data that uses a taxonomy that is the same across the country. And if families are in need, that is a place where people can go to seek help and find connection to services that ideally would support family needs prior to engagement in child welfare systems and other systems. I think that I realize the scope of what's happening with this project is huge already, huge and very complex, but understanding how 211 data might be integrated into this, and the use of that information for closed loop referrals, I think, is an essential part of this. I've also had some other comments around governance. I think my own specific interest is in governance, not in terms of the technical aspects, which I firmly believe are paramount, but how do you work with this within a community? How do you get the key stakeholders on the same page? Those are the areas of interest that I am most focused on. Thank you.
Definitely appreciate that. I hope that we will benefit from your participation. I know Christine speaks very highly of the work that you've been doing there. And I think bringing those perspectives to the table will be incredibly valuable. And I think the 2-on-1 piece is also something we haven't explicitly talked about, but I think that whole closed loop referral is really important, and some really innovative stuff going on with that, which is great. The fact that we're also talking about you're talking about sort of state level activities, which is really important, because I think there's a lot of information sharing has been pointed out that's at a smaller bore basically, and the kinds of information sharing that has to happen, maybe within a county or across different counties or within nonprofits and government sector. So there's the configuration is really important as we look at the variety of kinds of things. We're hoping not to create a solution as only, not even a solution, but a sort of a framework that works at a large level, but also at a smaller regional and collaborative level as well. So let me just say, if there are any other comments before we move on here from today. Anyone want to bring something forward to the table? Okay then. Well, I appreciate everybody joining in here. Mike, if you can advance a couple of slides to the survey slide, we're going to go through some of the other slides. Yeah, there you go. And so again, I welcome people back next week. We'll have a similar kind of agenda, going kind of a deeper dive into in the privacy work, and then figuring out how to break out into some deeper dive conversations into the technology and into the privacy and into the person matching, and perhaps even a couple of other ones as well, and try to really instill a little more conversation. When you have a moment, if you'd like, we're always looking to improve our efforts here, and so there's a simple 10-question survey. Just take some time to do that, and of course, send your comments, feedbacks. We'll be posting all this stuff along with the video today to the hub. For those who want to share it with your peers or your colleagues. And also we'll be engaging in, we'll have the PowerPoint up there as well, along with probably a short recap by early on Monday there. And that's the URL for it. So with that, everybody, thanks for joining today, and have a weekend, have a safe weekend, have a fun weekend. And look forward to seeing you all back here next Friday. With that, thanks a lot. Thanks for the group, and thanks for the support.